I don't. I think that if you make that change, I don't think that you are following an order of exaltation. And there are so many truths that are bound up within this, I think, that it would, to me, it would tear everything down. It would just tear everything down. Uh, and I don't see the Lord allowing that. I think it'll come to the doorstep. I think it'll be on the doorstep of the temple, but I don't think that that will change.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. And in today's episode, I have with me Greg Matsen of Cwic Media. Greg, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Steve, appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it's good to finally meet and dialogue. So, Greg, you put out a lot of content about the church on your channel, particularly things with like current news and church culture. You might also get into like doctrine, and you talk with scholars, and you also do interfaith dialogue. I think I've seen some recent episodes with Stephen Pinecker, who's a good friend of mine, evangelical, who loves the Restoration, and Pastor Jeff as well. So you do a lot about that. So maybe before we get into the topic of tonight, could you tell any of my listeners who aren't familiar with you a little bit about yourself, your relationship and background with the church, and a little bit about what caused you to create your YouTube channel and podcast and what it's sort of all about?
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. I was born in Orange County, California, out on the beach. Definitely a minority as far as being a Mormon goes at the time.
So you weren't in the Utah bubble?
I was not in the Mormon corridors, they call it, no. And so I think there's a certain experience that you get from that. And we did have, it wasn't like there was nobody there. Orange County does have, outside of the Mormon corridor, it's a reasonable, I had a high school that was maybe 16, I think it was 1,600 in the high school. And there were probably 40, I would say 40 members of the church, maybe 50 even. It's probably 40 members of the church.
Okay, so you're talking
there.
what?
So
Was that like 3%? So not, there were some,
yeah,
but not loads.
yeah. So it was some, and so we had a really strong youth group and great leaders and really strong church. But you still grow up in a place where I realize I'm definitely a minority, right?
Right.
And I think that gives you a certain perspective as you grow up. I had a lot of pushback from other kids of different religions. I had pretty bad experiences, in fact, with some teachers who were trying to get after me and attack me for my beliefs in front of everyone.
Wow.
And it's a lot of things like that did happen.
Religion?
Not very often, but it did happen. And so I grew up on the beach, did some surfing, a lot of body surfing, love sailing, scuba diving, anything to do with the water. I was definitely into, and went on a mission to Mexico City.
Oh, awesome. My wife's from Mexico.
What's that?
My wife's from Mexico.
Oh, is that right?
In the city. She's from Leon, Guanajuato. I think it's, it was a few-hour bus drive from Mexico
I've
City.
been to Leon. I know.
Oh,
Leon.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's in an area they call it Bajío. And so I was in El Bajío quite a bit. And I was in the state of Guanajuato for, I don't know, 7 or 8 months, maybe 9 months.
Wow.
Total. I was in Irapuato and Celaya and some other areas that are kind of in that general area. So very famous for their leather out there in Leon.
Wow.
But so anyway, so I was out there for a couple of years, absolutely loved it. Came home, got married pretty quickly, about a year and a half later.
Obviously learned Spanish.
Today is my 35th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
I don't know why you're meeting with me, but
yeah.
On your anniversary.
So, and then I've got 4 kids, 1 son-in-law, no grandkids yet. And yeah, so I've mostly been an entrepreneur. I built up a couple small businesses, a couple failures, a couple successes. I've been in everything from software to appraisals, to I had what I believe is the largest web development firm in the West outside of Silicon Valley. where we had all of the sporting goods manufacturers and Hyundai and Toyota and some other pretty big names that
Wow.
we worked with. And
So it sounds like you've been very both successful, both in the church, your experience in the church with your testimony, but also in the business world as well. That's pretty amazing.
yeah, ups and downs. I will admit there's been ups and downs in not in the church, but in business. But I've learned a lot. I later went and went into the financial advisor space and had a firm that I built up, and small firm, and did that for 14 years. And that's the last thing that I did before the podcast. So I did that and then got really sick, and decided that I had to. My wife actually said, "You're done." We were in a position where I was able to quit and sell the business. And so I
Right.
did, figured some things out health wise. And once I had those things figured out, which we did figure out, that's when actually I started really launching the podcast and really started putting out some content. So I was like, well, I've got this. I have nothing else to do. What am I going to do? So I just thought, well, I'll keep putting this content up and until I move on to something else. And as I kept doing it, I'm like, you know what? I maybe this is what I'm doing. This is all I do now, right? I run Cwic Media. I've got a book about to come out. We do tours. We've got the podcast and the YouTube channel, and some other ventures that I'm working on right now. And so I'm able to spend my time building relationships and doing what I hope is a positive effort for the church.
That's awesome. And your YouTube channel and podcast, as I said at the start, it's very much focused on sort of like church culture, sort of current events, things to do
Have you
with.
been hearing? I haven't had my mic up to me, but is that a lot better?
Yeah, it does sound better.
Okay.
I wondered
Well,
why
that
it didn't
helps quite a
sound
bit.
good. So that's sort of like the style, the content you tend to put out on your channel.
Yeah, the style. Like when I first started doing this, I put out a small series called Dinner with Millennials. And what I wanted to show was what my family's discussions were like at dinner.
Right.
And we talk about culture and doctrine and current events and philosophy and get into all these things. And so I just stuck a mic in front of or out in the middle of the table, and we just went and we ate, and you can hear the clanking of the utensils and the plates and everything as we're going. And sometimes there's a camera right on me, and I'm eating in front of the camera. It's not the greatest sight, but it's really interesting discussions. And that's what I really wanted to do with the channel. I wanted to have a style that was like, look, I want to talk about these things from a secular perspective, a spiritual perspective, and a cultural perspective. This is what I'd always wanted to do. And when I started doing it, there really wasn't anybody else doing it.
Yeah,
And
well, that's
so
what I've sort of been thinking about. Like, you have now like Word Radio, Jacob Hansen, yourself, who maybe cover current events, but in the faithful space, like you've got, maybe big channels like Saints Unscripted or Scripture Central, whatever, but they're mostly focused on like church history stuff or like, evidence for the Book of Mormon. Even my own channel, I tend to be more focused on like, like sort of like the truth claim, church history topics, CS letter sort of stuff, and diving into that. And now and again, I want to try to look at current events, but it's like there's so much happening and I'm only one guy, so I think it's great that you're sort of tackling and covering church culture and things which are happening. And there's been a lot lately which has come out. I think kind of started with Jacob Hansen's videos. I know you put out a video before about the church hiring a new director for communication for the church, Aaron Sherinian, and then Jacob's video, I think, sort of highlighted to people that there seems to be this confusion or almost like a division between the church's official doctrinal position on marriage, but then is there some confusing messages between things which are happening, and some people hoping or advocating, could the church be changing its position like it's maybe done with other things in the past? Any thoughts on that? Maybe speak on some of the recent confusion that you've seen.
Yeah, so I think that, look, we're in the middle of a massive culture shift, especially in the United States. It's like the 60s on steroids right now.
Yeah, American politics just seems crazy, to be honest.
It is crazy, and it's the changes are so fast that people can't really recognize and haven't gotten a grasp of what is happening. and why it's happening. And for a lot of people, they haven't been totally affected yet, but most people have now been affected by this in one way or another. And what I mean by that is people that have been affected by family members and others with the church, people who have questioned things about where the church is going, and the messaging coming from the church. And so and then you've got all of this information coming out, as you mentioned, so many channels, for example, on YouTube that are against the church and critiquing the church. And so when for example, I'd first put this out, I mean, people would look at what I was doing, and if they saw that I wasn't completely talking about, the Book of Mormon or church history, it's like, well, I wonder if he's, negative, if he's going to be against the church. Right.
Right.
And I still have people today that finally watch a video of mine thinking, well, I guess I'll give it a try, but they haven't before because they wondered, because of the issues that I cover,
They seem
if
controversial.
I was faithful.
Right.
I still get that. Right. And of course I've got, I'm coming up on 1,000 videos on my channel that, show that I'm very supportive of the church and the brethren and everything else. But
yeah,
one of the issues obviously is what I would call identitarianism. And I think even the church has had to grapple with this in a way that they have to say, okay, well, we've got an internal messaging to the church. We've got an external messaging to the world, to the press. How are we handling all of this as these things change? You've got this big change in the U.S. going to gay marriage, which wasn't there before. I mean, that was just in 2015. That was 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And
I think it was 2014 here in the UK as well. So it seems like it's been going around longer, but this is just really things that we're dealing with in the past 10 years.
Yeah. And then BLM, Black Lives Matter, and all the protests here and all that happened with that. There's just some really big cultural shifts and changes. You have pronouns, you have DEI offices in people's work, you have things being brought up in elementary school, as you call primary school, that have never been brought up before. And parents questioning, why are these being taught to my children? Why are these things being taught to my children? So this shift, I think the church is kind of, I think it catches us all by surprise. And I think it has caught the church a little bit by surprise in how to handle this. And I think they're trying to work through it and figure out how they will do this. But the confusion, I think, is it's hard, I think, for the church to give direct messaging on this to the membership without creating a lot of press, a lot of bad press, and because, for example,
the polarizing issue.
Yeah. It used to be, for example, last year, there was a law that was passed called the RFMA, the RF for Marriage Act. I can't remember what.
Yes, I heard about that. Yes.
Yeah. So President Oaks is out supporting this, right? And it has to do with giving more rights to LGBTQ individuals, right?
And people can interpret that as that the church now supporting gay marriage. Is that a big shift in sort of their position from 2008 time? That was when Prop 8 was happening, and then in 2015 with the policy that children of gay parents, this was when gay marriage was legalized, would be excommunicated. Some people might see that as the church is making a huge shift.
Yeah. And so it's, and honestly, when you look at the press release, it's not to the members of the church, right? It's not messaging to the members of the church. I mean, it does stay firm and say, this is not a change in doctrine, but it's very supportive of LGBTQ advancement, let's say.
Right.
And so, you've got a lot of members. I get, people emailing me and contacting me through my website every day. And everyone's like, what is going on? What does this mean? Right? Why are we supporting this? And you've got a member of the First Presidency who's out speaking on this and supporting it. And so but there's no internal messaging to the members of the church on why, a clear message that says, this is why we're doing this. And for President Oaks, whether you agree with it or not, right? He is doing this for the purpose of religious freedom, because there are
Right.
part of the law was to strengthen religious freedom, and in the face of these changes in the LGBTQ community, right?
Right.
But no one's talking about that. No one in the church from Salt Lake is putting this out to the membership. They used to take things like this, and you would read it from the pulpit in your ward. The bishop, or a member of the bishopric, would read it in sacrament meeting and would say, okay, well, the church is doing this, and we just want to, here's a message from the first presidency on this, and even, these types of things would, back with Prop 8, for example, that was brought up by in your ward. You heard about it directly from your bishopric. But now they don't do that. And I think the reason, I don't know this, but I think the reason is because they're afraid to cause contention.
And
Right?
it seems like it's growing in the church. I don't know if I experienced it too much over here. I've moved into New York, but I get the feeling from, the content I listen to that there's really there's a big divide on this topic, on this issue. There's those who you could say are more conservative or very much in line with the church's doctrinal position that marriage is between a man and woman, that's ordained of God. This is a core unchangeable doctrine. And there's some who are more liberal or more progressive who feel like this could change, or this should change. The church is wrong. There could be further light and knowledge. And it can be, I think, a cause of contention. I think some people are feeling like this is almost confusing, that the church it has its family proclamation, it has its official position that marriage is between a man and woman. The definition of marriage to the church is that it's between a man and a woman, and that any sexual relations outside that union, including gay marriage, they would say is sinful or breaking the law of chastity, whether or not you agree with it or not. But then some people are seeing some of these things, like the hiring of the new director of communication, Aaron Sherinian, who, at least in the past, seems like he was a bit of an LGBT ally or supporter. So it's like some people might think, are the church doing almost like small things to be perceived as more inclusive? Are they changing their tone? Are they moving away from this harsh statement? Could they back away from the doctrine? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the answer to that is no. But I understand why people think that, and are hanging on to that. Some people that want that to change. I mean, look, the holy grail on this whole thing for those that want to change is gay marriage in the temple, right? That's where it all goes to. And because without that, if you stop something before that, it's still going to be pushed to that point with this agenda. And that's what it is. It's an agenda. It's a movement. And right now that is the holy grail of making the change and having success for those that want to push this through. But I think one of the reasons that is growing is because there is not more messaging to the members of the church on this. And that's where the confusion comes from, because, you go back to the last general conference in October, there were 3 different talks, one by the prophet, one by President Oaks, and one by Elder Christofferson, where all 3 of them said marriage is between a man and a woman.
Yeah. So
Right?
it seems
They're
like from the
confirming.
pulpit, doctrinally speaking, what the prophets and apostles are saying, they're just reaffirming what our doctrinal position is. So you could almost say, listening to them, there's not much confusion what the prophets and apostles are saying.
Yeah, there's not confusion from the pulpit. The confusion comes in the hiring of the communications director. The confusion comes in what I would say is a lack of messaging. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying what is, and where I think this confusion comes from, because I hear from so many people on this, worried that things are going to change. And so when there's not that direct messaging to the members of the church on this to clarify a lot of these things, then what you get is this hope in something that I don't believe will ever change. And because it is so doctrinally central to the plan of salvation and exaltation, that any change on it would crumble everything. And so you have members then, because there's no, that messaging is confusing, that start to hope more and more that you're going to have this change. And to me, it's a hope in change over a hope in Christ, where instead that hope for those, for example, that have same-sex attraction, those that are gay, very difficult position to be in, and a difficult burden to bear, right? If you're going to want to be an active member of the church, that hope should be placed in Christ. And he's going to bear that burden for you and with you. And instead it's like, no, I want the systems to change. I want, I don't need to change. And it just opens the door more, I think, for people to say, well, this will eventually change. This is what a Charlie Bird, for example, says. This will eventually change. So I'm going to get married. And because I believe I'm one of the forerunners of this, I'm at the tip of the spear, so to speak. And it'll change anyway in a few years.
And one thing
And
I
I
find a
think
little
that's
bit
really sad.
confusing. Yeah, and one thing I find, kind of confusing, I think Jacob talked about Charlie Bird and his husband, and I'm not saying that I think, gay couples should get excommunicated, but I think what's a little bit confusing, there was a recent podcast on Mormon Stories, which I think was taken down, where Gerardo and maybe somebody else went, to check on Charlie Bird and his husband in the local ward, which I don't know how I feel about that, going to spy on people. But the church's position would be that any sexual relations outside of marriage between a man and woman would be considered, breaking the law of chastity would be considered sinful. And one of the things I think is quite confusing is it appears that Charlie Bird and his husband are they're taking the sacrament. They might even have callings. It doesn't seem like there's any sort of church discipline. While maybe there's other, couples or people who have maybe broken the law of chastity, even if it's heterosexual, who have maybe gone through some sort of church discipline. That seemed a little bit confusing to me, that somebody might think, are they kind of like privileged because they're almost like celebrity status? Is that why it's not happening to them? Could it get to the point where at the local level, there won't really be any sort of disciplinary action or any like privileges taken away if you're in a gay marriage? And could it get to the point where it's the church would almost not consider gay marriage sinful? There's some people who might look at it from an outside perspective and see, are they slowly just having the members get more used to this? I think Cwic, who sort of said that, is the church slowly heading this way? And it does beg the question, but I found that quite confusing. And I almost feel like while the church has a clear doctrinal position, things like that are very confusing at the local level. And I feel like that needs to be cleared up. The church needs to have quite a clear policy of, this is what happens if you're in a gay marriage. Because I don't think it's fair for some to go through disciplinary process or loss of privileges while others are in full standing. It's just quite confusing.
Yeah, again, I think the messaging, there's not good messaging to the membership of the church. It's just not. There's not a lot of clarity on it. I think they're afraid to do it, is my guess. I don't. They're going to go to the pulpit and they're going to say, here's what our doctrine is, but they're not going to say, this is what we're against. This is what but the problem is, in my mind, what I see is that, when you define something, right, you put a boundary around it, right? It is this, right? So there's a boundary put around it. So what you do when you define something, you're not only saying what it is, you're saying what it's not, right? And anything outside of that boundary is not this.
Right.
Okay? Well, that's what's happening in our postmodern world right now, is those boundaries are becoming very fuzzy with everything. And we seem to go along with that at this point, that boundary seems to be becoming very fuzzy, at least by the messaging. Because we're not, you'll hear what is, right? Family proclamation, marriages between a man and a woman, but you don't hear what it's not.
Right.
Right. And I think that what happens with anything is that if you don't define what it's not, right, then that boundary kind of starts to expand. It gets fuzzier, not as precise, and it gets broader and broader until it includes many other things. And so I don't think that you can define something just by saying what it is. I think you have to be able to say
To clarify
what
what.
it's not. And that would clear up a lot of confusion.
And whenever I read through the church's handbook yesterday, just to be clear about what's the church's position on, same-sex marriage or, any sort of homosexuality. And the church's position was actually quite clear as I read through on the handbook. They define marriage between a man and woman. They would view it as this doesn't fall under, marriage between a man and woman. Gay marriage would be considered sinful or breaking law of chastity. They're very straightforward. Whether or not you agree with that or you think it's bigoted or not, that is the church's official position. And I think the church is at this point where I think they're really trying to be as loving, as empathetic, as understanding, and try to be as inclusive as possible towards those who are LGBT. And I think it's really important that we try to do that, because I think some of maybe the teachings or statements from leaders in the past, and even like society and like the culture in like the 20th century, didn't have the same understanding towards those who were gay. Like, it was often referred to as like it's grotesque, it's a perversion, it's a choice, they can overcome it. And now the church is leaned away from that they don't understand, if it's something that people are born with or not. I think I would lean towards, I think they're just born that way. I don't believe it's a choice, my personal opinion. And they're now trying to state it's not about traction or sexual orientation, it's about chastity, right? I think they're really between a rock and a hard place, between wanting to love and be fully inclusive with those who are LGBT to participate in the church while not changing the doctrine. And I think Jacob's shown in his videos very firm statements from like President Hinckley or President Nelson that's like, this is God's standard of marriage. Like, this is his law. We can't change it. Like, this is a core unchangeable doctrine. So if the church were to change it, even if you wanted gay people to have the same opportunity for marriage in the church, it would be really hard to make sense of it with what the leaders are saying and with our doctrine to justify making this change. I don't know what you think on that.
Yeah, I think it would be very hard. And I think you have to also look at, I mean, let's look at practical, the church should do whatever it's supposed to do and follow the inspiration and follow the Lord. But the practical consequences of that, a lot of people will say, for example, that are on the progressive side, they'll say, well, you're losing people in the church because you're not being more open and tolerant and gay marriage and accepting that. And so people are falling away from the church because of this. And that's true. That's a big issue.
Right.
But can you imagine the fallout and those that would part from the church if we did add gay marriage into the temple?
Yeah.
I mean, there would
huge.
be a mass falling away, unfortunately, right? It just, that would be the natural result of that. And the other thing is,
seemed very crystal clear to a lot of people that this is them giving into societal pressure, really.
And certainly that's what it would look like, right? And so people will bring up examples of, well, the blacks in the priesthood and polygamy, and they had to give up and to pressures of the society and other things like that. Look, it is not.
I was going to bring those up. Yeah, what would you say to that? Because I tend to agree with you and agree with Jacob. While I have a huge amount of empathy and love, and if it was me or if I had a child who was LGBT, I would really wrestle over it. Like, I feel like I'm very blessed in some ways that it's not been the other way around for me, and I have so much empathy. But at the same time, it's like this is like from the very beginning, God created male and female. Marriage has always been defined as being between a man and woman. Yes, exceptions with polygamy. Homosexuality has always been condemned, although gay marriage has only become a thing like in the past 10 years. But it seems like it's a very core doctrine when you look at, temple liturgy, Adam and Eve archetype, when you look at the sealing ordinances and our view of exaltation in the afterlife. It's very much centered around a man and woman. And with all the statements from prophets and apostles that this cannot change, it'd be very hard, I think, for them to justify it unless there was a really grand revelation, the Lord coming and speaking to the prophet, and then you receive very grand revelation yourself. It'd be very hard for them to justify this as just a change in policy or doctrine. A lot of people be like, no, how can you change something that's so core and you've said is unchangeable?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The other thing is, the difference between those other two examples that are brought up is that those other two examples have precedence in the scriptures. There are times in the past where polygamy has been a part of God's law, and then it's removed, right? And unless it's sanctioned, it is wrong. But when it is
Right.
sanctioned, then the Lord permits that, or actually commands it, and perhaps even.
Yeah, it talks about that in
And
Jacob too.
and so that exists. The other thing is with polygamy and there might be a few fringe examples that don't follow this, but for the most part, the doctrine of polygamy is no different from a marriage between a man and a woman, right? When it's called plural marriage, it's because there are plural marriages,
Right.
right? And each marriage is the man kneeling on one side of the altar and a woman kneeling on the other side of the altar, one woman, and there is a marriage. And then that man later on may have another marriage between a man and a woman, right? And there's one man on one side of the altar and one woman on the other side of the altar. Well, why is that? Well, it's because that's what is part of the plan of salvation in terms of creating a family and moving toward exaltation, right? That it is to multiply and replenish the earth. And it just, that can't, you can use science to get around that to some degree, but basically if you need a man and a woman to produce children. And that's what the gospel's about. And that's the way it's built. And you talk about temple liturgy, it's the same thing. It's that entire experience is based on a man and a woman, right from the very beginning with the washing and anointing, right? And then you're going to go through the endowment, and you come through the veil, and you're not done then. Right after the endowment, then there is literally the crowning event, which is eternal marriage, and that's between a man and a woman. So that you're going to tear that entire thing apart if you change that whole temple experience and the whole doctrine behind the temple is going to have to change, which means the whole doctrine behind temple work and genealogy and turning the hearts of the children to the fathers and the fathers to the children is all going to change, right? And so that is not the same thing. It's not the same issue there. And then with the blacks in the priesthood, there's a precedence of many others not having access to the priesthood. In fact, the majority not having access to the priesthood at times. There is a precedence of keeping under the umbrella of the plan of salvation and exaltation of people not getting the gospel even. Most of the children of God that have ever lived on the earth have never even received the gospel, much less the priesthood. That doesn't mean they're not going to have a chance at exaltation and an eternal increase,
And
right?
there's many who would view the priesthood ban as well. I would lean more this way, that I don't think there was really revelation or a strong scriptural basis for the ban. And a lot of people would see that the teachings and justifications for the priesthood ban that came from Brigham Young were pretty much unchallenged and accepted by subsequent prophets. There were some, I think, like Hugh B. Brown, who was maybe not in support of it, but it wasn't until 1978 that the revelation was received to basically take away the ban that maybe should never have been put in the first place.
Very possibly, that's right. Yeah.
Now, some people might say, like, oh, if you look in the Book of Abraham or the Book of Moses, talks about the seed of Cain being black, or Pharaoh coming from the loins of Ham, and not having rights to the priesthood, which perhaps could have been an influence for Brigham Young, but it seems like he was getting this from the culture and the environment and all the prejudice and reasons which were given for blacks being inferior to whites. But the church's position is they've disavowed those past theories. They don't view dark skin as a sign of God's sort of disfavor or curse. But some people might say that it was considered doctrine. Prophets and first Presbyterian and the apostles, for a while they said it was doctrine, it was a policy. I remember reading a First Presidency statement on it that it was, they considered it doctrine and commandment of the Lord. Somebody could say, like, well, if they considered it doctrine, it was for over 120 years, the church's statement, and then maybe they're wrong, or they receive further light and knowledge. could it not be the same on this issue? Like, that's a question I'm going to propose to you, is because I've had a chat with people like Jim Bennett in the past, and I think their view might be that not necessarily that this shows that we've been wrong about marriage, but could this be further light and knowledge, or like expanding upon marriage to include, gay marriage as well? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
My response would be no, I don't think it is. Again, I think that these other examples fit underneath the umbrella of the plan of salvation and have precedence beforehand. Again, going back to the blacks in the priesthood, you have Joseph Smith, who ordained black members of the church to the priesthood. Sure. And so it is a Brigham Young issue, really. And so I don't think that that's the case. Again, that didn't change the temple. That didn't change the plan of salvation. That doesn't change exaltation. That doesn't change going back to the very core doctrines of Genesis and the Garden of Eden story, right? Of a man and a woman, and I command you to multiply and replenish the earth. The whole reason, when you look at our doctrine, that the reason we are here, and we say it's to receive bodies and be tested, and that's all true. But the reason the earth is created, and this is why it's in the temple experience to begin with, it's not to sit there and look at some history of how the earth was created. That's silly to me, is because it's showing you a relationship between you and God. And that relationship here on earth is, look, God is going to create a physical earth where you can come down and receive a physical body. And the reason you're having a physical earth and a physical body, a physical world, is so that you can go through certain experiences, but also so that you can receive the covenants, the Abrahamic covenant. Ultimately, either you're going to get it yourself, or you and your body is going to provide it for someone else who doesn't have a body anymore. Right. And so it is that idea of creating an eternal family and going through that covenant path, which is about the ordinances, is about having that, receiving a physical body. Well, how do we receive physical bodies? We receive that through a man and a woman and through the creation of a family. And so the whole purpose of the earth is for that, right? And when you look at Malachi 4, what is it, 5 and 6, the last two verses of the entire Old Testament.
Yeah.
And turning your hearts, the hearts of the fathers of the children of the fathers, or the other way around, I don't remember. The very last part of that, the last words in the Old Testament, is basically, otherwise the earth will be cursed. Well, that's what they're saying. The earth is going to be cursed because it will not fulfill its purpose of the covenants and the temple work. Right? In other examples of that, it says the whole purpose of the earth will be utterly wasted. And so, from a doctrinal point of view, it's not just a matter of, of saying, well, is there another way around this? Can we have you're tearing the entire fabric of truth and the order of God. And a lot of these things you may not think of, but they're there. And when you take that away, the whole thing is going to fall apart. All of it falls apart, in my estimation.
Right. In my conversation with Jacob Hansen, I tried to, be an open-minded person. I like to try to steel man the other person's side. And I was trying to think of the best maybe arguments or reasons that either I've heard or that I could think of for perhaps if this were to change, what could be some arguments to support it? I'd be interested to get your thoughts. We've already talked about a couple, but somebody might say that, for example, the Bible condemns homosexuality, both in the Old Testament, you have Paul in Romans 1. The Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants of Pilgrim Christ are quite silent on homosexual matters. I think you could say it reaffirms marriage between a man and woman. We've got Doctrine and Covenants 132. So somebody might say that this has become sort of a current issue So in the past, nobody would have inquired about, would God approve of gay marriage, because it just wasn't a thing. Like, it's not something they would have even thought about. But now that it's been, accepted in society, and there's people who maybe feel in their heart that, like, I wouldn't want somebody who feels attracted to the same sex to lead either a celibate life or a mixed orientation marriage, which does work for some. So I don't want to, I want to acknowledge that path for some. But they might think that, is it possible, due to these current circumstances, that might cause the prophet to wrestle, to inquire at the Lord, and perhaps further light and knowledge could be given, which wouldn't be given in prior, dispensations, because it has become a modern issue. Now, of course, you could look at it as they're just giving into societal pressure if they were to make that change. But any thoughts on that argument, that it's become a relevant issue now? It's more understood that homosexuality is an orientation, that it's not just like this perverse homosexual act as it was maybe viewed at, in biblical times, and the possibility that that light knowledge could be given, similar to, like, say, when it came to the priesthood ban around that time, external things which influence them perhaps going to the Lord and receiving a revelation.
Again, I don't think it'll happen. I just don't think it'll happen. And because I think it will tear everything apart. What I think the further light and knowledge that is revealed is, as you stated earlier, is making sure we're in a position to love every individual. And that has not been there in the past.
No.
And because there's not been an understanding about these things. And so that's, I would say, would be the light that was needed, and an understanding of the burden that they bear there, and where, the difficulty in reconciling really what they feel their identity is, or one of their identities, with the doctrine of the church, and their desires as compared to the doctrine of the church. But I also think that, another thing we get from President Nelson, I call it President Nelson's identity hierarchy. The understanding of the brethren with what's happening there is, this is a fight over identity. And there are movements, not just there's, and I try to split this up as best I can on my podcast. There are LGBTQ individuals.
Yes.
And then there is a movement and a philosophy, right?
Like an
and
ideology.
sometimes these individuals can be a part of that, and sometimes they don't want anything to do with that movement, right? They are separate. They're different things. There is a movement. There is a philosophy. There is an identitarianism and intersectionality movement that is very anti-family. And I think you can see President Nelson, a couple of years ago, he gave a talk to the youth, actually, I think it was YSA. And he talks about the identity, and it's been repeated a few times by the apostles, where, look, we are first a child of God, we're second a child of the covenant, and third, we're disciples of Christ. And everything else, all other labels, all other identities, right? This is race, this is gender, this is sexual orientation. Those are the three big ones. Those are down below the line. It's not that they don't exist, but this movement tries to raise these things up above these other identities, right? It enforces
your primary
them,
identity
it pushes
marker.
them. Yeah, it pours salt on the wound, so to speak, and tries to say, these are the most important things. This is more who you are, your sexual orientation. This is more who you are, your race. But those are divisive issues. And the primary divisiveness to me is actually to the family, and working against the family. So that's a long answer, but I think the light is, yes, there has to be an understanding, a better understanding of what these individuals are going through, who they are, that they can be very spiritual and have their eye toward the glory of God. And how do we work through it? And quite frankly, we should be working through this as a people. It's not just them. We should try to work through this as best we can under the doctrines and understanding of the order of God.
Right. So I think you were asked this question beforehand. So it seems from my understanding that, even if people make arguments from the scripture that, there could be a new revelation or further light knowledge, you see it as from the very beginning, this is a very core foundational doctrine, very central to the plan of salvation. And it seems like it couldn't be justified. I've heard some people say that, because some people have made the argument that it might undermine the family. Some people might say that, the legalizing of gay marriage didn't have any effect upon, say, my own marriage or my own family. And, just as, I've heard different scholars or apologists say how like polygamy is the exception, monogamy is the norm. Why couldn't monogamy, marriage between a man and woman, still be the norm, still be the general standard, but perhaps gay marriage be the exception to the rule? And could there be any justification for that, any sort of further light or knowledge, or if God was able to not so much redefine marriage, but marriage being practiced differently under certain circumstances with polygamy, could it be possible with gay marriage? I think, again, I know what your response would be to that, but that could be another sort of argument or reasoning someone could give for perhaps this maybe being accepted.
Yeah, again, the church's purpose is to, and President Oaks talked about this about a year ago in one of his talks in General Conference. It's the purpose of the church is to teach and help people achieve exaltation. Right. And there is a path for that. And it is a straight gate and a narrow path. And it's hard. And it's not just hard for people that are LGBTQ, it's hard for everyone to be able to assimilate to those things, to throw off the natural man, and to, give all the glory to God and be humble enough to follow and submit to principles and orders of God. So I think that if you make that change, I don't think that you are following an order of exaltation. And there are so many truths that are bound up within this, I think, that it would, to me, it would tear everything down. It would just tear everything down. And I don't see the Lord allowing that. I think it'll come to the doorstep. I think it'll be on the doorstep of the temple. But I don't think that will change. That will change.
So what do you mean by that? Getting to the doorstep of the temple, do you see more changes happening with the church almost being more, I don't know if accepting is the right word, because the church would view that we accept LGBT people, but could you see it almost getting to the point where they might consider, gay temple marriage, but then that would be as far as it could go? Or could you clarify what you kind of mean by that?
Well, look, I think that there will be more and more individuals and more of a cultural shift. Whether we like it or not, I don't care if you're talking about the brethren or you or me. We're at least a little bit a product of our culture.
Sure.
And we're influenced by that. And so will there be more and more pressure? Yes. There's going to be more and more pressure in Salt Lake to make changes. And I don't see that dying down at all. I see that increasing.
Yeah.
And increasing and increasing. And will there be more and more rogue bishops and stake presidents and others that are going to say, well, we're going to go ahead and you've got a married couple here, a man and a man, and we're going to keep them active in the church and support what they're doing and put them up at the pulpit and have them talk. And yes, I think that's going to happen. I don't see how it won't. I don't see possibly how that is not going to continue to grow and to happen in the church, and then therefore become more and more accepted through practice.
Yeah.
And so coming to the doorstep of the temple, yes, I think that there will be pressure. I think that there will be pressure from the members of the church as well, not just outside. I think there'll be I think the hardest pressure will be from the inside. And, it's not hard to see that, right? It's not like it happens that way with everything. It happens that way in every institution. It's happened already that way in many Christian denominations. You know, you got the blessings now of the Catholic Church of same-sex couples. They're not marrying them, but now they're blessing them. And so there's that incremental inch by inch that I think will be very difficult for us to avoid.
Right. I have two final questions I want to ask you. I asked a similar one to Jacob. So this is a hypothetical, but hypothetically, you know, comparing it to when Peter received the revelation about, you know, the gospel to go not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. And my recollection is he had a dream and he was shown, you know, different animals which would have been considered unclean under, you know, the Mosaic law. And, you know, Peter was like, I've never partaken of these unclean things. And the Lord said, what I have declared, don't call unclean what I've declared clean. And if, let's say, the prophet were to have had a grand revelation like this as he inquired about this matter, or even yourself, say the prophet had a very miraculous, profound revelation from the Lord, you wrestle with it, inquired about it, and you had a dramatic revelation, something along those lines, what would you do with that in light of what you might perceive as, you know, this undermines the whole sort of plan of salvation? But if that experience was claimed by a prophet, or if you were to receive that, a very grand revelation, what would you do with that?
Look, I know that a lot of people in this, or that would talk about these types of things, are like, look, I would leave the church, or I wouldn't sustain the brethren, or whatever it might be. I don't know. I don't have that kind of reaction to those things. I have no control over that, right? I have zero control over that, whether that happens one way or the other. So I'm not going to worry enough about something I have zero control over.
Which is a hypothetical.
Yeah, even in that hypothetical, I can't control that either way. So if that were to happen, what am I going to do? I'm going to continue studying the Book of Mormon. I'm going to continue praying. I'm going to continue going and receiving the sacrament weekly from the priesthood. I'm going to continue going to the temple if they'll let me. Right? I mean, if things change and I don't believe in it, maybe they don't want me to anymore. I don't know, but I'm going to continue to be active in the church and try to grow spiritually and try to serve those around me and do what I have control over.
Right. And final question, you know, with sort of some of the confusion that there is at the minute, or what some people perceive as mixed messaging, is there anything that you would like the church to do without, you know, being, you know, critical or advocating? You know, for example, I sort of feel like I would like a general conference talk, maybe really addressing this and maybe reaffirming the position and clarifying it on like the practice level, so there's less confusion. And I always feel like I wish there was clarity one way or another, you know, just so there's not so much confusion. Is there anything that you would like to sort of see the church do? Because I think being in the state of confusion isn't good for the members.
Sure, I think that would be great. You know, I in my mind, and again, who am I? But sure, I think that type of messaging would be great. There's obviously a reason why they're not doing it. It's not like this doesn't come up and they're not talking about it probably all the time. So they're making a decision among some very inspired men and very smart men about this messaging. And, you know, I don't agree with what they're doing in that way, but I don't know what they know. I don't know what they know in terms of, you know, a broader look at the entire church and how they're trying to maneuver this. I can disagree with it. I don't have a problem with disagreeing. That doesn't mean I don't sustain them. That's my point. I do sustain them. And so, yes, I would say, sure, based on my knowledge, I would love to see the messaging in this specific area of what not to do and what the law of chastity is and isn't, and specify that. Again, I don't know that they will do that.
And the practice or at the local level, you know, those sorts of things.
Yeah. And and create, look, like you said, you've referred to the manual. We've got, for example, at least one trans woman in our stake who I've met and talked to, and that man is in the elders quorum, and everything about him is followed. It goes right along with the way to handle these things in the manual. Now, if there's others where that's not the case, again, I think that's going to happen on a regular basis on the local level. And, I right now I have to look at what is taught from the pulpit, what is in the manual, what is in the scriptures, and I'm going to anchor myself in those things.
Awesome. Well, great. I really enjoyed getting to know you and having this chat with you today on this topic. And everyone will check out his YouTube channel, podcast. It's Cwic Media or Cwic Show?
The podcast is Cwic Show.
Cwic Show. Okay. Because I thought I had in my head Cwic Media, but then I saw the Cwic Show.
That's the company.
Right. Well, very good. And if people want to keep up to date with your content, you tend to talk a lot about sort of things happening in current church news and church culture. Go check out his channel. And if you've enjoyed this, give it a like, comment underneath your thoughts in this episode, share, and don't forget to subscribe as well. And we'll see you next time on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, Greg. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.